The Toronto Maple Leafs look to add secondary scoring as they head toward the midpoint of the season. Meanwhile, the Colorado Avalanche look to overcome injuries and shore up their defense and goaltending. And the Chicago Blackhawks have a new coach, but can he get Connor Bedard and the team back on track? We've got all that and more on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Gil Martin here, and welcome everybody to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts so you get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the co-host of Locked On Leafs, David Morassutti, and little tough time for the Leafs the last couple of games, losing to Washington and Pittsburgh. What was the biggest reason in your mind for these last two losses?
I think it's twofold. Bad starts, really kind of slow out of the gate, and then just all the offense hasn't been there, right? They've been getting goals from their top guys. They haven't been getting much offense from the players below the top lines. And that's been something that's been a trouble for this team all season. And, they kind of were getting by because their defense was holding the fort, and their goaltending was doing pretty well. Last two games they played, teams have got a bit more offensive firepower, and that's made it a little tough for them, right? But I really do think it's the slow start. The other team has been able to establish, good zone time, and at least haven't been able to get that rhythm offensively.
How do you think they address the slow starts?
Well, I think it just comes to getting your top players. I know that it would be one thing to get your depth to step up, but I think it starts with the top players kind of getting the team off to a good start, and then everybody else kind of falls in line, right? Like, what they did a couple games ago against Nashville, they didn't score for the first two periods. They put Matthews and Marner back together. Eureka, they scored 3 goals within 5 minutes. But that should have just been a short-term pairing together. I really do think they need to split Matthews and Marner apart, not because they can't play together. It's the impact it has on the rest of the lineup. If you were to separate them, now you can balance things out a little bit, and teams are not going to choose to just go after Matthews and Marner. They have to now account for the rest of the lineup. And there's a trickle-down effect when you do that. So my hope is that when the lineups come out, when the line rushes for practice come out starting this week, those two aren't together. That, I think, has to be the first thing, is you got to separate it, and you got to stop taking penalties. They have been taking too many penalties, and when your penalty kill is spending a lot of time there, your stars aren't playing a lot. Even though the stars do play on the penalty kill, they're not out there to go and drive you offense on the penalty kill. They're there to help kill the penalties. So I think that's another issue that they have to sort out.
Max Pacioretty activated off LTIR. What, if any, impact do you think he'll have on the secondary scoring and on the lineup in general?
Well, he's been a good addition this year. It took him some time, but he has started to find himself a bit of a role, right? Physical presence, more physical than I expected. The amount of hits this guy throws out there. And then he was getting some nice chemistry. There was a line with him, Tavares, and Nylander that were really gelling before he got hurt. That if the Leafs are adamant on keeping Matthews and Marner together, maybe that's a trio you bring back. Personally, I think that the Tavares Pacioretty combo does work quite well. It's that third player. Who are you going to have on that line, right? And so what I like about Pacioretty is he's smart, and he doesn't have to play a lot to be effective. And that's something you want to see from a depth player, right? He doesn't have to play, 16, 17 minutes. He could play those 12 minutes and still be an impactful player. But what I would like to see from him, a little more shooting. This Leafs team needs players that are going to be more willing to shoot, because there are times they're going for that extra pass. They're being what Craig Berube likes to call too cute. Craig Berube does not like cute hockey, and so I think a guy like Pacioretty, I think they're going to need to see more. He has 25 shots in 14 games, so it's not like he hasn't been shooting the puck, but he should be shooting the puck more. He has been known to be a goal scorer. I think he needs to pick that up again.
They had just announced the rosters last week for the Four Nations tournament. The Leafs pretty well represented, but one player who was not was John Tavares. Do you think this was a snub of Tavares? And then overall, are you pleased with the Leafs representation in the tournament?
The main guys are there, right? Matthews, Marner, Nylander, pretty much leading their countries. I was surprised with Hakanpää, not because I don't think he's a good player, but because of his injuries. He's still dealing with the knee injury. He had a little bit of an operation that I guess he did it now, so that if he does want to go play at Four Nations, he can. Tavares, that was a tough one. Canada's such a tough team to make. And yeah, there are some players that are very deserving to be there. But when I look at especially what Tavares has been able to do this year, he's picked up the slack when Matthews was hurt. Him and Marner, I would have thought you've got a pairing right there in Marner and Tavares for Team Canada. Then you throw whoever you want on the left wing there. I thought that would have made so much sense, because in a tournament like this, you need chemistry. So Marner could play with anyone. I get that. But if you already have Tavares and you can put whoever you want on that left wing, kind of would make an easy job for John Cooper and his staff. So I just think Tavares has played so well this year. He played well at the World Championship. He missed out on his chance when he got hurt in 2014 in the Olympics, and that for him, he doesn't have many opportunities to represent Canada anymore. And I think he is still a game breaker. He can play in different situations. I know maybe they don't see him as a penalty killer, but he can play in those late games. He's good on the faceoffs. He's sound. He's played very well defensively. I personally, that was the snub for me for the Leafs, is not having Tavares there.
So, the Leafs are one of those perennial playoff teams right now. And as we head into December toward the Christmas holiday, what are your early indications as to what the Leafs will be looking to do when we get closer to the trade deadline?
I think, depth is going to be key. Do they go out and maybe add another defenseman if they feel like they just want to make sure they're all solidified there? Injuries with Jake McCabe, missing some time. Chris Tanev has been the healthiest one of the healthier defensemen, but we know his history is not exactly squeaky clean. But I do think up front they need to go and find, Fraser Minton's done such a great job as a third line center. If he can continue this way, then maybe you can pivot a little bit. You don't have to go find that center, but I think you need to find someone to play with a Fraser Minton. They need more physicality. I think in that they need a bigger body, a guy that's going to be able to, help a young player like Fraser Minton, open up some space for him. And I think Nick Robertson, he's a player that I thought could at least thrive in a depth scoring role. It hasn't happened. So maybe you find an upgrade on that. I think they need to find some depth scoring and just a bit more of a bigger body power, again, almost like a power forward that could play up and down the lineup.
Anyone in particular who you think they may be focusing on, or it's still a little too early?
I still think it's a little too early, because there's probably some teams that figure, hey, maybe we can keep the window open a little bit more. But one player I will say, and he's come up in talks before, is Brock Nelson. I know he's a center. He's more of a top six guy, but you put a Brock Nelson lower in your lineup, the way he's been able to produce, I think he's the type of scorer and center that this team could need, because you lose a Tavares or a Matthews, your center ice position looks a little bleak. right? So I think if you go out and add a Brock Nelson, it solidifies your center ice position, and so that's a potential move you can make there. I just don't know who else right now would be available, that because they're so hard to find, like that power forward type. Not many players are available now. Well, they won't be available until a little later, but I am very curious if they can find that maybe a little earlier. I don't want to. The Leafs like to get things done a little bit earlier, but it does take some time for those trades to work out.
No doubt about it. Well, David, I'm sure you'll have your finger on the pulse of the Leafs the rest of the way. Why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Yeah, you can find myself on X at _Morassutti. And yeah, follow the Locked On Leafs podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and also up on YouTube. And you can make sure you can also subscribe, follow us on X at Locked On Leafs.
All right, David, thanks so much.
Appreciate it, Gil.
I love a great deal as much as the next guy, but I'm not going to crawl through a bed of hot coals just to save a few bucks. It has to be easy. No hoops, no BS. So when Mint Mobile said it was easy to get wireless for $15 a month with the purchase of a 3-month plan, I called them on it. Turns out it really is that easy to get wireless for $15 a month. The longest part of the process was the time I spent on hold to break up with my old provider. Go to mintmobile.com/lockedonnhl to get started. There you'll see that right now all 3-month plans are only $15 a month, including the unlimited plan. All plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. You could use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and bring your phone number along with all your existing contacts. Find out how easy it is to switch to Mint Mobile and get 3 months of premium wireless service for $15 a month. To get this new customer offer and your new 3-month premium wireless plan for $15 a month, go to mintmobile.com/lockedonnhl. That's mintmobile.com/lockedonnhl. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month. $45 upfront payment required. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details. Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at Game Time. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. One of my favorite features on the Game Time app is the view from your seat. You go on the app and you can get a panoramic view from your seat, so you know exactly what to expect before you purchase the tickets. You can also get tickets to all your favorite teams on the Game Time app. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Just download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show Shaggy Von Doom himself, Kyle Sullivan, the co-host of Locked On Avalanche. And Kyle, an interesting weekend for the Avs. A couple of wins and a shutout by Scott Wedgwood, followed by, preceded by a 1-goal game by Georgiev. Who are these guys and what have they done to replace the Avalanche team that we've seen for most of this season?
Why are you asking me? I'm asking everybody that question. and it's the Avalanche kind of put themselves in this position. It was honestly, Georgiev's back was against the wall. And this is also a week removed from the Avalanche trading Justus Annunen, a highly touted backup that almost had the reins in the playoff series last year, but was sick. And Georgie took the reins one more time in that Winnipeg series and never gave it back. So the goalie position for Colorado has been putrid, to say the least. It has been abysmal. Statistically, just garbage for both goalies. So Justus was traded for Scott Wedgwood. And the thing with the goalie position, it's been abysmal all year statistically. No matter if it's Georgiev, if it's Justus Annunen, and you're ushering in Scott Wedgwood, which is not really, breaking news, no matter what. A couple of NHL teams have already spent some time with Wedgwood. and he's a very average, serviceable goalie. And the position that the defense and the goalies this year for the Avalanche have put him in, that average goaltending looks like a Vezina goalie in Colorado. It speaks a lot for this position. And you know how road trips go for NHL teams, the team kind of bonds and they figure things out. You don't have home to go to. You're in a hotel. You're going to figure things out. You're going to ride the bus and you're going to talk about this as a team. And you're seeing that for the Colorado Avalanche. Georgie, it's been a weird year. And me and my co-host, Chris Pacelli, we have talked about it. Even if he had a Vezina year, this is his last year in Colorado. And it was one of those that he knows that too. And you can either just write it out or you can start playing good to, bump up that contract when it comes up. And you're seeing that a little bit. And Wedgwood is just playing serviceable. And that defense is they have such faith and confidence in just average goaltending that they can actually do what they have to do where they don't have to compensate for bad goaltending.
How much of the defensive struggles, because the Avalanche are near the bottom of the league in goals allowed, how much of it is on the team defensive structure and how much of it is on the goaltending?
The answer is both. Yes to all. If you have to click an answer, it's yes to all. Because the running joke around Avalanche circles is one shot, one goal for Georgiev. That's honestly how it's been all year. The Avs have started down. Most of the games this year, they had 37 first period goals leading the NHL. They're atrocious to start the game. And let's not be honest. I mean, the forwards aren't helping out here. They're not scoring either. Nathan McKinnon, Mikko Rantanen, it takes them a while to get going, and they explode in the second period and try and keep it close in the third. So with this new Georgie that I don't know how long it's going to last, but it's been welcome sight to see, and Wedgwood giving them some kind of confidence in net, the defense could start playing defense again instead of playing backup goalie and defense. And the forwards can build off this confidence. And you're starting to see that with this recent run that the Avalanche are on.
Why the slow starts? I mean, this has been a problem all year long.
It's more of a mentality thing. They understand what they have to do. And it's almost like they are sitting there and watching everybody take their punches. They adjust in the second period and everybody's gassed by the third period and they take advantage, which has been cute to watch, but it's not. And me and my co-host Chris Pacelli, we talked about this. This is not a sustainable game plan. The Avalanche know the slow starts are a problem. They will talk about it post-game, and then the next game it's the same story. So you're seeing the Avs in the past two games actually get out and lead in the first period, and they find out, wow, this is actually an easier way to play the game. And I think this is going to be the MO going at least till Christmas.
So you're basically saying the Muhammad Ali rope-a-dope style of hockey is not advisable.
And I understand what the Avalanche are thinking. I mean, with injuries being rampant up and down this roster, you have to do what you have to do to win games in the NHL. And the roster changes each and every night for this team. Like even on defense, you've lost Josh Manson with a broken hand. And forwards, they just got Ross Colton back. Miles Wood is out month to month. That's a significant injury in NHL talk, month to month. So the Avs are trying to figure out who they have on the ice, who's got the legs, and what their opponent is going to do. They let their opponent kind of play in the first, and they clean it up in the second, third. That's not a hill they can overcome with the talent on this roster every night, night in, night out. But they have found ways to win, and now that Ross Colton has returned, they have Calvin DeHaan making a real difference on defense. They're starting to find their legs and a vibe, and they're starting to put some wins together, which they needed to do a couple weeks ago.
As far as health goes, anybody else whose return may be imminent right now?
Well, it fluctuates with the day. Like Ross Colton, we heard maybe, and then automatically activated off injured reserve and end the game. So Gabe Landeskog, no idea. Jonathan Drouin, week to week. And then you got Miles Wood, who is month to month. And Josh Manson, it's going to be 6 to 8 weeks minimum. So we'll see. But injuries are a problem with this Avalanche team. It's just next man up, and figuring out how that next man fits in this team is where your first period problems come into play.
Because of all these injuries and all of this inconsistent lineups that the team has to put out, has this been one of the better coaching jobs just to keep this team competitive right now?
Gil, don't say that out loud on the NHL show. Nobody gives Jared Bednar credit here. You can have the Jack Adams Award winner, and he's never considered. He does an incredible job putting this team together. And honestly, we forget this team has Nathan MacKinnon, Mikko Rantanen, and Cale Makar. He allows them to go out there and fix the game, save the game, and do their job. There are many nights they don't. And he doesn't get out in the press conferences afterwards and belittle the team. He never says a negative thing. Anytime he says something critical, he always gives a compliment as well. He's one of the nicest player coaches that are out there. Like they consider him one of the team. No, Jared Bednar is criminally underrated when it comes to what he does in Colorado for managing this roster. Nathan MacKinnon, Mikko Rantanen, and Cale Makar, he allows them to go out there and fix the problems that the Avalanche have. Without Gabe Landeskog as captain, somebody has to step up. Jared Bednar allows for leaders to step up naturally, organically. And he puts the best roster together with the call-ups and roster management. It's one of those things that you look at the Avalanche, you see the top to bottom roster, you say, oh yeah, they should win. They have Nathan MacKinnon and Mikko Rantanen. But Jared Bednar motivates this roster to step up and fix their problems. And when they don't, he gives them the compliment and he gives them a critique, but he's never belittling his team. It's why this team welcomes him with open arms. But when you see the win in the win column, you always look at the stat line. You never look at the coaching. And it's one of the most underrated, and it's the secret sauce to this Colorado Avalanche team.
So how does this team shore up the defense and the goaltending with all these injuries and with the revolving roster door?
It starts with in net. It's the confidence of your goaltending is going to be more than, goaltending has been sub 900 all year long. And you've had some 500 nights, like you've seen the goalies pulled many, many nights. And it's demoralizing and it's hard to come back from, especially with injury problems. When you're seeing your first periods clean up, you're seeing your goalies make saves and start actually tending the net. You can start building the confidence that way. Now that the goalies are fixed, you'll see the defense start cleaning up a little bit because they're not having to overcompensate. And that also spills over to the forwards. So this is the right place at the right time for a change, and it starts now.
All right, Kyle, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you and your co-host on social media?
You can find us on YouTube. Just search Locked On Avalanche. You can also search on X, Blue Sky, Instagram, Locked On Avalanche. We're there. And if you want to find me, you can find me at Shaggy Von Doom.
All right. Kyle, thanks so much. Always a pleasure.
Thank you, Gil.
Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL, all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you could check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you place your bets. And hockey fans, use your knowledge of the game of hockey and your favorite team to find exciting bets on FanDuel. Check out all the latest odds on the app. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. It is great to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On Blackhawks, a very busy man these days, Jack Bushman. And Jack, it's been an eventful weekend in Chicago for the Blackhawks. They change coaches on Friday and then lose their goalie a day later. Let's start with the coaching change. Was this inevitable, and when did you know for sure it was going to happen?
Yeah, ultimately, Gil, I did think at some point in this rebuild there was going to have to be a coaching change. It just kind of seems since Luke Richardson had taken over with the struggles on offense that have continued over into this season following the Blackhawks getting some more notable players up front. They bring in Teuvo Teravainen. He returns to Chicago. Tyler Bertuzzi gets a big contract. They were expected to be better offensively. The last two teams under Luke Richardson's leadership, quite frankly, they were tanking teams. But this team wasn't expected to be dead last in the NHL. So I thought Luke Richardson was going to wind up getting let go eventually, but Gil, I thought it was going to come at the end of the year when he was going to be up for a team option, just because this still was a year where, yes, we wanted the Blackhawks to get out of the absolute bottom of the barrel, but there still weren't playoff aspirations or anything. So I figured they were going to let Luke Richardson coach until the end of the season, but ultimately, with the offense just struggling so much, 31st in the NHL. And if you were watching this Blackhawks team, it was kind of the same narrative that was plaguing them night in and night out. And it was not like they were losing games. They just couldn't score enough to win those close contested 3-2, 4-2 battles, and it was killing them. And with Connor Bedard not putting up the numbers that everyone wanted to see during his sophomore year, the style of play that Luke Richardson was running clearly just wasn't working for Bedard or this offense as a whole. And ultimately, Kyle Davidson just said, we couldn't go on for this during the final 56 games of the regular season. So as tough of a decision as it was for him, he ultimately had to make a change, and I understand why he did.
And what is the goal now for the rest of this season? Because I mean, the playoffs are highly, highly unlikely. And like you said, wasn't the goal to begin with. So a successful last 50 plus games of the season in Chicago looks like what?
Yeah, what interim coach Anders Sorensen, there was not an announcement, but there was a clarification on his name, Anders Sorensen, who has stepped in as the Blackhawks interim immediately when he had his press conference. He said the goals the rest of the way under his leadership were going to be to win games, which every coach is going to say during a presser, but to also focus on the development of the young players. And that really should be the name of the game for the Blackhawks this year. And again, going back to that first point, Gil, that's why Luke Richardson ultimately got fired, because not only was this team dead last in the league in points, but we also weren't seeing the production from Connor Bedard, from Lucas Reichel, from Alex Vlasic, and some of the guys we want to call up from Rockford under Luke Richardson's defensive system. It would be hard to see them succeeding, and you don't want to toy with those young kids' confidence. So that's ultimately what led to Luke Richardson being fired. Was you weren't getting the development or seeing the team get better. And under Anders Sorensen's leadership, it's just all going to be about development. He's trying to get the defensemen more involved in the offense, because that's been missing from the Blackhawks a lot this year as well. But it's going to be all about development. That's the name of the game. And with the Blackhawks being where they're at in the rebuild, that is very fitting.
How has Connor Bedard handled all of this? It's got to be difficult on him, and he's got to be frustrated by his lack of progress in year two.
Yeah, I mean, he's as disappointed as anyone. He's been very vocal about his frustrations. But at the end of the day, Gil, I know everyone's disappointed that he's not taken that massive jump that we saw out of players like Sidney Crosby or Connor McDavid in their second year. But he's still the leading point scorer for this Blackhawks team. No one on this team who has way more experience than he does is putting up more points. He's still the second youngest player in the NHL. He just needs a little bit more help, and we also got to do a better job at putting him in situations to succeed. And under Luke Richardson, again, he was being asked to do a lot defensively. Luke Richardson was a very defensive-oriented coach, former NHL defenseman that played in over 1,500 games, so that was kind of his forte. And Bedard did take some leaps in the defensive areas this year, but it was to the demise of some of his development offensively. So we just got to continue to get Connor Bedard the puck in the neutral zone, in transition, in good spots on the power play. And also, he just needs a little bit more support. The guys around him, Teuvo Teravainen, Tyler Bertuzzi, Philip Kurashev, those support forwards all have been so underwhelming this year and are a huge reason why this Blackhawks offense as a whole is struggling so mightily. So if Connor Bedard can continue to get a little bit more help like he's gotten these last few games, he's starting to put up more points and bust out of that little mini slump. He's gotten a couple of goals in the past week. I think he's going to continue to put up some more points, and I think there are better days ahead for him. He was so snake-bitten in the month of November, but it's going to be a team effort to help him out as well, and it's good to hear at least Anders Sorensen is, going to be prioritizing Connor Bedard and these young kids this year.
And then just on top of all that, you lose your starting goalie. Talk to me about Petr Mrazek's situation and how long you think he'll be out and how they'll handle it.
Yeah, just when it rains, it pours, I guess, Gil. Fortunately, it sounds like it's only going to be a 1 to 2 week injury for Petr Mrazek. That's the good news. The bad news is that it's a groin problem. And if you've been following Petr Mrazek throughout his career, or just any goaltender, the groin, when they get issues there, they tend to linger on and on. So we're hoping that's not going to be the case with Petr Mrazek, but he's been plagued by a groin injury in the past. His couple of years before he came to Chicago, actually, most of those couple of seasons he spent out due to injury with a groin problem. So hopefully he'll be able to heal up and get back on the ice, because the Blackhawks certainly need him. They're going to be thin at goaltender without Petr Mrazek.
Who steps in as the backup now and who steps in as the starter?
Yeah, Arvid Soderblom is going to be the number one immediately. And fortunately, he's played much better this season than he has last year, but he still only made 7 starts. So obviously going to be leaned on heavier than he has thus far in the season. And then Drew Commesso, the Blackhawks' top goaltender prospect, probably is coming up from the Rockford Ice Hogs, might wind up having to make his NHL debut just because, like I said, this could be a 1 to 2 week absence. So yeah, it's going to be a team committee effect on the defensive side of things for the Blackhawks without Petr Mrazek.
The team is also having difficulties with its television situation. Talk to me about that and how frustrated fans must be with everything that's going on.
Yeah, tough situation when the only options for Blackhawks fans right now are to either purchase the CHSN app, which is $19.99 a month. And I know a lot of fans out there aren't very interested in doing that to watch a last place hockey team. And if you don't want to do that, your only other options are to go and buy an antenna 1970s style, or hope to have Fubo or DirecTV, because the biggest cable provider in Chicago, Xfinity, still has not been able to reach a deal with CHSN, as we're now 27 games into the regular season. So hard to have hopes or expectations that they're going to get a deal done at any point. And yeah, it's just causing a huge, even bigger problem for this Blackhawks team. On the ice, they're having issues. Off the ice, I mean, it's very difficult to grow engagement and grow fans and try to encourage people to watch this team or come to games or support them through these dire times when it feels like they're not doing everything in the fans' interest, and it feels like they're doing things for money's sake. It's a tough time for the Chicago Blackhawks, Gil. I'm hoping something will give here sooner rather than later, because Original Six team, one of the best, if not the best, sports cities in the entire world. People will watch if they're on the television, but when they can't watch in their living room, it tells you how down bad this organization is right now.
Yeah, hopefully it's always darkest before the dawn, and that things will start to turn around with the new coach and hopefully moving forward. Jack, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast, where they could find you on social media?
Yeah, absolutely. You can check out Locked On Blackhawks for free wherever you may listen to your podcasts and on YouTube. You can check me out on X at Jack Bushman2. Gil, good to talk hockey with you as always. Thank you for having me on.
Hey, always a pleasure, Jack. Thank you. I want to thank my guests. I want to thank David Morassutti of Locked On Leafs, Kyle Sullivan of Locked On Avalanche, and Jack Bushman of Locked On Blackhawks for joining me. I'm Gil Martin. I host the Monday edition of Locked On NHL, and I co-host the Friday edition along with Rachel Donner. Don't forget, we are here every day, Monday through Friday, bringing you the biggest stories from around the National Hockey League right here on the Locked On NHL podcast. So subscribe now, where on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, so you get new episodes as soon as they drop. I want to thank everyone for making Locked On NHL your first listen today. For your second listen, find Locked On Fantasy Hockey. You can become a fantasy hockey expert and get the edge over your league mates with daily tips from hosts Steele and Flip. Find Locked On Fantasy Hockey on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Have a great day, everybody. Stay safe, and thanks for listening to and watching the Locked On NHL podcast.